I am co-chair of the Redding Consortium for Educational Equity. Thank you for joining us again this week. And of course, thank you everyone for your participation in the meeting last week. We are treating this meeting as a full body meeting as opposed to the more retreat oriented format that we had last week. So we're going to start with some usual agenda type housekeeping, and it looks like we do have a quorum. So we do want to approve our minutes from, what was the date on the meeting for which the minutes were sent out? December 14th. For our December 14th meeting. So you should have received those in your email and hopefully had the opportunity to review those. We didn't give you a printout of them. But while we have quorum, would love to entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So the motion is on the table. Signify your support with an aye if you are in favor. And feedback. And if you are online, I guess we would just ask that you type the word aye if you can do that. Or in lieu of doing a roll call. Is that okay? Okay. All right. In the room, if you are a member, signify your support with an aye.
Aye. It's just retirement planner.
Congratulations, Superintendent Fuller, on your announcement this week. Okay, I believe you guys will let me know if we did not get sufficient support for the motion, but I think that the motion carries and we now have adopted the minutes from December. So we will spend the first little bit here getting some, I think, pretty brief updates from two of our other working groups. As we know, all of our working groups, apart from the redistricting project, are in what we're calling monitoring and implementation mode, but that comes with it some new information and adventures. So I'm going to yield first to you, Kelly, to give us a little update on how things are going with Boost 2226.
So just really quick update. We are currently, the IPA team is working with Dr. Menzer and the chiefs to pull together the data and see, to see if we can check the effectiveness and see what's happening with the students in this program. First step was making sure everything can match together. It's taken some time, but we're getting there, and we should hopefully have more of an update at the next week.
I'm looking at you, Ray, just because you're a co-chair and making sure that that's good with you. We put some information up on the screen for anyone who needed a refresher on what Boost is, or if you're online and you haven't attended one of our meetings prior. It was one of the programmatic efforts that came out of the social determinants working group. Anything to add, Ray? I think we're good. And I think we'll expect to have a deeper dive on this in April. Am I correct?
Yep.
So you don't feel like you need to speak to it any further unless you wish to. Okay. Any questions? All right. All right. So Tika online. All right. Tika Hartsoft is the work group chair for our educator work group, and wanted to give us some updates about the Redding scholarship. So Tika, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm excited to give you guys some updates about what we've been doing in the educator work group as far as monitoring the initiatives that we had outlined previously. So there are two initiatives that the work group had focused on with the IPA staff and the DSU staff in partnership with DOE as well. And the first of that initiative was the Teacher Leadership Initiative. So between October and January, I had the opportunity to participate in several school visits alongside Representative Smith, as well as Senator Lackman, the Redding staff, and some of our other DOE partners. And so during these school visits, we learned about the impact that the Redding supported programs were having on the teacher leaders. The teacher leadership program as a whole, as it was providing the professional development, and we got to see that in action as far as the recommendations that have been put forth. To note that this is a pilot program for this year. There's 12 schools that are participating in the pilot. For the Brandywine School District, there's Harlan, Christina School District has Bancroft, Bayard, Stubbs, Pulaski. And then the Red Clay School District has Johnson, Lewis, Shortledge, and Warner. And then from our charter network, we have Eastside Charter and Coomba Academy and Thomas Edison as well. And then our other initiative was looking at the Redding School Support Scholarship. And with that, we met with our DHEO to provide some oversight and help to monitor the implementation of this program, putting some parameters on it for next year. Let's see, how many staff? So I believe of the educators and eligible school staff that applied for the program for each term, that included summer, fall, and spring, there were over 200 scholarships that had been awarded to our eligible employees, and that has been since the fall of 2022. Many of those educators received more than one award, which is good to see if we're getting them through the finish line. And so we've been working on identifying some additional metrics to also track that data and ensure that we're getting folks over the finish line, or if they were just kind of starting their journey. So some of the data that we've been able to gather from the scholarships is the number of educators who've been awarded, which Redding School they're employed at, when they were awarded, and what program or degree they were enrolled in. So we have 3 educators that have been awarded 5 awards, 6 educators that have been awarded 4 awards, 15 educators that were awarded 3 awards, 36 educators that received 2 awards, and then 43 educators received a single award. There's also been 54 applicants that have been awarded the scholarship program for the current winter and spring term. And then to give you a little more data update around that, while DHEO doesn't currently track recipients after they graduate for the program, that is the area we talked about adding to the upcoming year and to track as well. Hello, can you hear me? I'm sorry. I thought something was someone had a question. So there are 103 individual educators who received a Redding school scholarship support, and they've also remained at that Redding school as the one that they've worked at when they had their previous award as well. There are 3 individuals that changed schools, but they continue to receive the funding. All 3 of the individuals were moved to Pulaski Learning Center when that school opened. Both the school they transferred from and Pulaski Learning Center are also eligible. So therefore the individual was able to continue with their scholarship award. And then also just to kind of close as we start to wrap one up, another update to give. Representative Smith has stepped down from the educator work group and from the Redding Consortium as well. So we'd like to take this time as the consortium to thank him for his leadership over the past few years, and as a co-chair of the educator work group prior to me attending. The time we worked together was just a short one, but I definitely enjoyed working alongside him.
Thank you, Tika. Thank you for that, and especially that acknowledgement. I appreciate your acknowledgement of all the hard work that Representative Smith did from the very beginning of the consortium work in standing up a lot of these programs. So you're right, we can kind of take a moment to give him his props. Yes.
Absolutely. Were there any questions?
Any questions for Tika? And Tika, thank you for stepping up and giving such a solid report that makes it very clear that you have gotten right into it. So I'll just look around the table. And I don't know if it's online in the chat. Sorry, go ahead, Tika.
No, I was gonna say, I actually have thoroughly enjoyed being able to visit all of our schools that we're working in and see the projects in action and actually talk to the people. And like, for instance, I remember particularly at Lewis where I spoke to the staff there and I was asking them about what they had gained through the project. And they went from having zero support staff in the coaching role that were in-house to having actually, I think it was four. It was either three or four, but I think they had them divided out by content area. So it was great to see that they had already immediately added such value.
That's great. And I know you're going to keep that up and continue to have more such updates for us. So if there are no questions or comments, sorry. Oh, Tika, what were the 12 schools again? Representative Chakotay?
Sure. It
Sorry.
was no worries. Harlan for the Brandywine School District. Let's see, there was 3 charter schools, which were Eastside Charter School, Kumba Academy, Thomas Edison. Then there's also Bayard, Bancroft, Stubbs, Pulaski, Johnson, Shortledge, Warner, and Lewis were the 12.
We can get you that in writing.
Yep. So there's
Thank-
12 Reading schools and 9 of those were also WLC schools.
Right. So the 3 additional or the 3 additional are the charter schools that you mentioned. Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Great. All right. So I think with that, thank you, Tika. We can move on in the agenda. And again, last week we had our public retreat where we focused entirely on the work that's been happening around the redistricting proposal. And I'm gonna hand it over to Representative Chakotay, and I believe Councilman Street is online to handle this portion. You know, we wanted to continue what was started and, you know, make sure everyone understands that we are receiving what we're hearing from you, the consortium, as the working group on this project. And with that, Representative Chakotay.
Thank you, Senator Lockman. And my heart does not believe it's only been a week because I'm like, oh, this has happened in a week. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. When we did present, again, it seems like 2 weeks ago, but Councilman Street was not available to give his presentation for that presentation about the way we were going to present our plan. So I wanted to allow Councilman Street the opportunity to speak about the historical significance of why now and why it's so important that we begin pushing forward with our interim plan. So Councilman Street, I will yield to you to begin.
Thank you, Representative. I don't want to tie up a whole lot of time, but I'm going back to 1981. And when we're in the process of making the transition from the county district to the 4 districts. Superintendent of Brandywine is screaming, it's not fair, it's not fair. I got the Bucket and Riverside. Superintendent Colonial says, well, I'll take one of them, but basically you have to pay me. And that deal was cut over the coalition's objection. And Riverside was transferred into Colonial. And Colonial got Christiana Mall and the port and funding equalization. Well, in my opinion, it was wrong and rotten then, because you basically what you did was you took the lowest income children out of the former the former segregated district and bust them out of the city for 13 years to the other former segregated school district. And at the point where they closed King's School on May 25th, 1981, we went into court, asked for release, and the judge went berserk and basically told us that the other schools were closing throughout the county and black kids had to endure the same consequences. And at that point, they had me, this is when I started being at council table. I asked Judge Williams and Irving Morris to appeal, and they said, no, we don't want to appeal. We don't want to lose the judge. And I'm like, you just lost him. He just told our kids to go, whatever. Um, so now we come forward into the resegregation process, and not one, not two, but three, and hopefully this will be the fourth. General Assembly created task force or commissions that have recommended 2001, 2008, 2015 a weighted funding formula for high poverty schools and a reduction in the number of districts in the city of Wilmington. I waited till 2016 when the process was up in the General Assembly, and basically I said, I'm not going to beg y'all to do right by my children anymore. If you don't pass it, I'm going to sue you. They didn't pass it, thus the funding litigation. I have been, and basically an additional $100 million a year is not monopoly money. By the same token, out of a budget of $2 billion, it's not a lot of money. And you have a recommendation floating around saying it was closer. The recommendation to half a billion to 600 million is closer to what I would have wanted if I could have had the settlement all my way, but that didn't happen. But since then, I have been of the view that because of what happened in 1981, that the court wouldn't provide relief. Well, I've completely and totally changed my mind, because in 1981, there was no such thing as a Neighborhood School Act. And either the Neighborhood School Act is a law or it isn't. And we're at a point now, we've come forward with a preliminary plan that is consistent with the first plan. It reduces the number of districts from 4 to 2, and it puts Riverside back into Brandywine, and it takes city children out of Christina. And I'm gonna try to close out quickly, but at the end of the day, I'm well aware of pushback and actually some sabotage already in process, and that's fine, because I was expecting that. But those kids in Riverside and those families in Riverside, which by the way is not going to be public housing going forward, there are already new homes in process, and I fail to see how the district is being disenfranchised by an additional 300 kids. And we propose to, at that aspect of the river plan, that will put Shortledge and Warner in the Brandywine, where recommendation is that Shortledge and Warner stay in Red Clay. More importantly, folks can say what they want to say. The State Board of Education closed Reach, closed Warrior, closed Marion T, and their proficiencies were higher than all the city schools in the Christina School District. Most other jurisdictions in the country, those city schools in Christina would have either been closed or taken over. And I know, based on fundamental fairness and appropriate education, and this is over a long period of time, because when Office of Civil Rights came in 2012 and found that Christina had discriminated and disciplined district-wide at all levels, it was shortly thereafter that we began to see proficiency scores less than 10%, and in some subject categorical areas, zero proficiency. The state is well aware of it. And that situation cries out for relief. And by the same token, those of us who have met and have talked about it, we're not naive to the fact that moving kids from one school district to another by itself is not going to resolve anything. There have to be specific plans for remediation, support services, and a change in the way things are being presented. And in the case of Christina, we know these kids are having the worst difficulty ever in elementary and middle school. And then we send them off to high school knowing they're destined for failure because of what they don't have. There needs to be a plan going into the high school specifically for those kids who are 0 to less than 10% proficient. That's my little overview of the history. But again, for those who are pushing back, I am not going to beg. I never have begged. And either the Redding Consortium, the State Board, and the General Assembly give us relief, give those kids relief, or we have no option but to seek relief elsewhere. The other thing is the so-called bucket, as it existed at the time, that public housing is now homeowners. And the same thing is going on in the new construction in Riverside. So for all those who, for no reason other than the color of their skin, are allergic to children in public housing, that's not even an issue now. And I don't see the reason for the pushback that has already started other than the way those children look. And 44 years after the so-called deseg order, that's just sad. And quite frankly, some of those folks I think should be ashamed of themselves, because that just shows that nothing has changed. And it's a whole George Wallace kind of view, segregation forever, and that's never going to be acceptable to me. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Councilman Street. Appreciate the insight and historical overview. Really gives us an understanding of the charge and you say the urgency of now and the moment that we're trying to seize to move up this initiative for Redding Consortium and our governance plan forward. I will temporarily get back to our co-chair.
He's handing me the baton again briefly. We'll interrupt his presentation because we did want to make sure to do one very important, I don't even know if I can call it housekeeping. But we sent you a memo from our Deputy Attorney General, Caroline McDonough, that hopefully you had a chance to review. And this really is part of their presentation. It kind of sets up for what the representative is about to speak to. But I wanted to make sure to draw everyone's attention to that. We sent you by email. We have it in print as well. And so the leadership of the consortium and the project leads for the redistricting project, we did meet with our Deputy Attorney General after our consortium retreat last week, just to kind of check ourselves on process, because I think we know we have some real clarity around the history. We have some real clarity around what we think the finish line is. But we obviously want to be sensitive and inclusive about how we get from that one point to the other point, and to make sure that we are interpreting our own code properly in terms of how we may get there. And so I wanted to give Deputy Attorney General McDonough the opportunity to maybe walk us a little bit through the document that you shared with us so we can understand the processes at our disposal. And how what our options for us look like maybe a little differently than how we were presenting them last week. So I think.
Hello. Can everyone hear me okay?
Oh, there you are. Hi, Caroline.
Hello, I'm sorry everyone that I'm late. Oh, I see how large my face is on your screen. I don't love that. But I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I've been running from meeting to meeting, but I'm really happy to be able to join you all to begin my time with you. So like Senator said, the memo is in front of you all. And, you know, as you can, hopefully everyone's had a chance to read it, but I'll just go over the high points. The code section 1026, I'll just refer to it as 1026 or the code, mentions the option for the consortium to submit interim plans to the Department of Education, or excuse me, the State Board of Education for their consideration. And that is really all it says about interim plans. So with that, I interpreted and I spoke to the leadership team, like Senator Lockman said, about it. I believe that the consortium can really make the interim plans and the process by which the interim plans are presented to the state board look the way that you all would like it to look. I recommended working with the State Board of Education on that process. Any interim plan cannot, any interim plan that's submitted that is not complete and does not adhere to the requirements of section 1026, which I'll address in a second, cannot be submitted to the state board, signed off on, and then be final without all of the final plan elements laid out in section 1026. So the State Board of Education, per discussions with the consortium, you all are able to formulate this back and forth process as much as you want and to be as collaborative as you would want. I recommended to the leadership team that an interim plan be drafted, submitted to the state board, and then ask the state board for feedback about what they like, what they don't like, what they are okay moving forward with, what they would like removed, etc., without giving approval, formal approval. They can give a conditional approval so that you all know the direction, you know, to move in. Of course, you wouldn't want all this work done and then get to the end and not have any visibility into the State Board of Education's perspective on your plan and then it not pass because, you know, both sides weren't working together to collaborate throughout it. So an interim plan, as I mentioned, can really contain any specific information, data points, etc., that you all see fit, that you have ready and at your disposal, and that the state board thinks would be useful. As this earlier in the section 1026, there is a long list, as I'm sure you've seen, that lays out specific data points and information that must be in a final plan submitted to the State Board of Education in order to change or alter school district boundaries. I won't repeat all of those, they're in the code, but there's a long list of mandatory data points and information, and then there's a list of permissible but not mandatory data points and information, and it's at your discretion as to whether to include that information in the interim plan. Once a final plan is submitted to the state board, it adheres to the requirements of the section, contains all the information. The state board can reject it and they can let you know what they don't like and how they want you to fix it or, you know, ameliorate it. You send it back and go from there. Once you submit a final plan, the state board has 3 months to review. Hopefully it will not take that long because if you submit interim plans, they will, you know, be pretty up to date up until the submission of the final plan. So they will have seen previous drafts, i.e. the interim plans, but they do have 3 months per the code to get back to you. Before the State Board of Education can alter or change any school district plans, the state board or the consortium, this code gives the option for either, must hold at least one public hearing in each of the school districts to be affected by the final plan, including at least 2 in the city of Wilmington. There is no requirement in the code that any public hearings be held before or after interim plans are submitted. Public hearings don't need to be held before a final plan is submitted, but they need to be held before a final plan is signed off on and a change or alteration of the school district boundary is enacted. However, I did speak to the leadership team and I recommended speaking with the state board, finding out if a public hearing in these affected school districts would be something of interest to both the consortium and the state board. Sometimes when plans are very nascent, it's not always, helpful to have a ton of public input, because what you're presenting to the public, as you all know, is not final and it's subject to change. And so you don't want to waste everyone's time. But if plans are pretty set in motion, it could be useful to get public feedback, use that in preparing the interim plan, and then work with the state board on that process. But again, it's not required per the code. So let's see, in the final stages, if the state board approves the final plan submitted by the consortium, after all the public hearings are held and all of that is adhered to, the state board will then submit a final plan to the Controller General in order for the Controller General to prepare a fiscal analysis of the final plan in accordance with subsection 1026H. Once this fiscal, that's on the Controller General, it's left your hands, and it's the consortium's time to wait. Once a fiscal analysis has been prepared by the Controller General, the final plan with the fiscal analysis will be submitted to the General Assembly for consideration. In order for the final plan to be enacted, so in order for those district boundaries to be altered or changed in any way, the General Assembly must pass a joint resolution, which the governor must sign. Hopefully that all happens. Fingers crossed. It's a nice, smooth process. And the authority of the consortium and the State Board of Education with respect to this section 1026 will continue until the confirmation of a final SBE approved plan by the governor and the General Assembly. So once the governor signs that joint resolution and everything is final, the authority of the consortium to act, this is getting ahead of myself, but of the consortium to act under this section will cease and will not be necessary anymore. I know that was a fast, high-level overview of a long section of the code. So if there are any specific questions about the process that I talked about or that I didn't mention that are in the memo or are not mentioned in the memo, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Caroline. I thought that was very clear. And I'll just say one thing, sort of my new understanding that puts us in a different frame this week than last week before I hand the baton back to Representative Chakosha. Well, open it up to questions and then hand the baton back to Representative Chakosha. Is that my understanding of the work product and the work process was that what we had was this interim stage proposal toward the plan. And I think what you were seeing in the timeline presented was our misunderstanding that all of the processes that are required for a final plan were required every time we submitted an interim plan. And we, of course, are still, I think, very interested in public feedback and some of these other things, but we're not in the same position of sort of racing towards a General Assembly deadline, for example. So that's a key difference that you'll see reflected in what the representative is going to bring forward now to talk about process moving forward. Although I think in our minds, the overall timeline was always the same to get to the fully fleshed out idea. But any questions for our Deputy Attorney General? You did a great job. Oh, wait. Superintendent Jones.
Sorry, Caroline, just Jonathan Castle County VOTEC. Just out of curiosity, section 2B, where it says all school districts must cooperate fully, what does that look like and sound like?
Of course, yes. Thank you for bringing that up. That was one point I was just going to mention myself because I wanted to touch on it because I got a question from people and the leadership team about that. I'm just pulling up the code now. So I wanted to mention it because we received a question about whether or not, and this doesn't quite answer your question, but I will answer it, I promise. We received a question about whether or not the school districts had to sign off, because in other parts of section 1026 that do not involve the consortium, there is a requirement that school districts sign off. I won't go into too much detail because that's not useful. We're in the consortium land right now. But I just wanted to note that school district sign off is not required. School districts, however, as you saw, are required to cooperate. And what that looks like It doesn't specify the process by which that happens, but what it means is that the school districts are requested and required to cooperate with respect to providing financial, student, personnel, and any other data the consortium thinks would be useful in drawing these plans. I think I mentioned it in the memo. I hope I did. Yes. So the specific subsection of the provision that addresses school district cooperation is 1026D3D. And that, I don't want to spend too much time. It's a kind of a long section. But like I said, that really just, requires that the school districts help provide any data that the consortium finds would be useful in proposing a change or alteration of the school district plans.
Superintendent Holder.
I'm trying to figure out from the explanation you just gave, whether interim means a phase of a plan being implemented
Mhm.
or a separate plan that is a temporary piece as the rest of the plan gets determined, final approval and implementation by the state.
So that's a great question. And per the code, that's something that is up to the consortium. The code does not address what an interim plan looks like. It simply reads that the consortium may submit one or more interim plans for action under this section, which may address redistricting to ensure that all school districts have contiguous geographical boundaries. So what an interim plan looks like, whether that's phases or whether that's, like you said, different versions, different drafts of a plan, is really at the discretion of the consortium. And that's why I recommended to the leadership team last week that would be most useful, and I'm not in this world, so I'm not an expert, but I imagine it would be useful for you all to speak and work with the state board to figure out what they envision would be most helpful to receive in steps so that you all can work collaboratively in order to ensure the final plan has the greatest chance of success when it's officially and formally submitted.
Kevin.
Last question on it, because you opened this up. So the question is, can an interim plan be submitted and approved? Or do we have to submit the entire plan to the State Board of Education for approval?
So you're asking whether or not the state board can approve an interim plan, or they can't, or do they have to wait to approve until a final plan is submitted?
Correct.
Okay, so the state board can approve an interim plan. The only thing they cannot do, and the only thing an interim plan cannot do, is actually propose changing or altering school district boundaries. To reverse engineer it, the State Board of Education cannot approve a plan to change or alter district boundaries without all of those data points, information processes, like Senator Lockman said, included. So by extension, the state board can't approve a plan, an interim plan, that merely suggests changing boundaries. I know that that's not super helpful or really, clear in this context. So the best I can offer is that the state board can conditionally approve an interim plan, but they cannot formally sign off on, in the simplest of terms, you all submit an interim plan, you say school district boundary line A is moved across the block. They could not approve an interim plan that says that. They could conditionally approve your suggestions and your ideas about moving school district boundary line A across the block pending X, Y, and Z. So they can't take formal action, but they can let you know that they approve
And
pending final submission. Sorry.
I guess sort of try to restate it. I think I can get clear, and maybe I'm the only one who wants to restate it. But so what you're saying is our interim plan certainly can include our proposal around changing district lines, but the only thing that actually makes that an official binding thing is when the state board sends it to the General Assembly and the General Assembly approves it. That is the only thing that makes it real, so to speak.
Exactly.
Body follow, it's just, listen, this is a big task to take on. I've been in government and politics and a lot of, at some point, it may be that we have a lot of consensus on hypothetically moving Christina into red clay. But the other side is more of a challenge and it's just pulling us down. That was my thought. Can you just, define the word final? That's a tough one as well. What is the final plan? But I think we're getting a little bit too in the weeds. We'll go along and with the interim plans you said, so I understand what we've got to be able to do now and what we can submit.
Well, and final is when all those stipulations that we were reading through last week and tearing our hair out, when we can answer everything in those stipulations is when we have a final plan.
Exactly.
So you could implement the plan only to find out that the state board doesn't approve it, and you have to go through the process of the implementation.
There's no
No, no.
implementation, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
There's no implementation until the whole process. Implementation is a next step.
And that's exactly what he's gonna be speaking about when we.
Yeah, so this is
Fine.
all planning, proposal and planning, and then up until the final plan or proposal is submitted to the state board. Everything is planning. Implementation is not until approval through all bodies, the General Assembly and State Board.
I mean, we could make other recommendations that
In the interim,
that happen in the real world, I think,
Right.
but that's sort of. That's gonna take action outside of the consortium in a way. We can approve recommendations to the General Assembly, for example, and the General Assembly could take action on those recommendations. But that's not gonna be the final approval of a redistricting plan per se. If these are interim steps that we believe we must take to get to that plan. I'm sort of speaking, I feel like I'm speaking in a really obtuse way right now, and I'm gonna turn it back to Ray for your question, but.
I don't really, well, I have an observation. Under, number 2D, it seems to contradict that which precedes it. It says before the State Board of Education may change and alter any school district boundaries. The State Board of Education really doesn't have the authority to alter or change school district boundaries.
Yes, that's it.
Right, but this reads as though they do. D,
I see what you're saying. Yes, that, I'll hope I'm not interrupting. That's not meant to signify that the State Board of Education has the legal ability to change or alter plans. That was meant to signify that the State Board of Education cannot approve any final plan that proposes changing or altering any school district boundaries, because the chain of custody, so to speak, is that it would start with the consortium, go to the state board, they approve or deny, etc., and then it moves on to the controller, General Assembly, and governor. But you are correct that I apologize if that's misleading the state board. That was not meant to signify that the state board has the sole authority to change or alter boundaries.
thank you. I mean, I'm just pointing it out because this is going to go out to other people that are not in this room. And so it's already complicated. No, so it's just like in layman's terms, it sounds like that the State Board of Education's role is to be a reviewer and a collaborator of sorts. And then once it is deemed that the plan is considered final, then they still have to approve the submission of it to the General Assembly. Did we do this before?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm happy to make that change. If it is going to be, I know it's a public record, but if it's going to be distributed, I'm happy to make that clear. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And, oh, sorry, very good. Any
And I don't know. if
Superintendent Green?
This question with Ags, and I wasn't paying attention, I'm trying to read the subsection, under subsection 1026D3A with regards to the 13 stipulations that have to be a part of the final plan. Do they also need to be included in any interim plan?
The question, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing. The question is whether or not those 1 through 13 have to be included in any interim plan. Is that correct?
So the things that
Right.
are, the final recommendation and plan has to include all of the following. All right, and so we're saying we're looking at interim plans along the way before a final plan is included. does the interim plan also have to include all of those things, or the interim plan can be parsed out?
The latter, it can be parsed out. It can, if you have it already, you're more than welcome to include it, but it does not have to include all or any of that in order to be submitted for feedback from the state board.
Right.
Really quickly, so this is harkening back to, was it last week when we met?
Yes.
Around the questions around the absence of financial projections. So this to me clears that up, that the plan, the fiscal analysis is done by the Controller General's office.
Right.
We didn't have that knowledge last week.
A lot of this process was cleared up over this past week.
Yeah, it was outlined in one of the stipulations, but because we haven't completed the stipulations, there's not information from which the Controller General can perform that at this time. So that's obviously a major hangup. All right, I hope I found this very helpful, Caroline. So I'm gonna clap for you, and I would invite my colleagues to do the
Not
same.
necessary, but thank you all for letting me present, and I hope to be able to see you in person next time.
Great, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
And with that, I'm gonna zip it and hand it back to Representative Kocha.
Thank you, Senator Lockman. And again, I guess it's almost like a restart from last week, because with this new information, it really gives us a different approach with different marching orders in terms of when we look at our timeline and actually what our steps are in terms of where we are today. When we looked at our initial charge from House Bill 229, and we know that now, based on the directions from our code and from the Deputy Attorney General, that we can submit this interim plan. So the interim plan to us will be staged. So our first initial step is us presenting what we all know as the river plan or variations of the river plan. That's our initial step. That will be our initial interim to start with that plan, but we can submit interim plans. So our goal, and we had some meetings and discussions with the state board about how frequent we may submit interim plans, and it will be based off of our information, our feedback that's gathered through our body, and how we begin to edit and enhance and address the stipulations in our plan. And as they are addressed, we will submit those to the state board ongoing. So that's our goal, is to continue that in the frequent phase. And you'll see on the first sheet, it mentions that our timeline for redistricting, our timeline, the way we're trying to phase it, is looking at this first phase to hopefully when we get to the point of having a finalized plan that will be submitted to the state board will be a year and a half, 2 years max. But what we're targeting anywhere in that year and a half phase, to have our working group continually meeting, our body continually meeting, and again, during that time period, submitting frequent updates and drafts of the interim plan to the state board so they're aware. And the slide that's showing now is our draft timeline overview. So it's showing where we are now. And again, our suggestion, our base of our interim plan is that the 2-district model, and we're moving forward with that. And again, as was noted last week, we chose this model in terms of the river plan as the base of our interim plan, because over the so many iterations of groups like Redding before us, and WEAC and the Neighborhood Schools Act group, all of these groups decided that the Rivers Plan was something that they supported. The school districts have voted in support, city council. So we felt that this was a good place for us to start. So that's why we have that as the base of our interim plan. And that's our step one. So that's our initial step, our initial plan that we will be submitting to the state board, is just saying that we want to remove districts from the city and begin this partnership with all of our city districts to begin to develop what that looks like. How do we address the stipulations that are within the legislative charge? The second point, what we're considering to be the second step, is outlining a stronger role for the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. What's been noted, as you see, our timeline is a year and a half, 2 years planning, and it's been noted that in terms of one of the questions that were asked about implementation, our implementation isn't 5 years, 5 years away, 3 to 5 years away. So in the interim is where we're taking what we believe to be step 2. So our first step will be that submitting this interim plan about having this Rivers model. Then the second step is about ways in which we can try to address some of the immediate concerns within the city in the educational landscape. And one of the ways was mentioned was to look at the WLC and some of the work that they're doing within the city of Wilmington. We're working with the WLC as well as DOE, trying to figure out ways to strengthen and support efforts to strengthen the MOU that is in place with the districts to give the WLC some authority that can strengthen their role to assist with our immediate concerns, some of the immediate concerns that are within the city of Wilmington. So that is that second step, trying to work again with the MOUs to address some of those immediate concerns. And those concerns are inside of our school, and some of are outside. They deal with community issues. They deal with engaging our local government, city council, the mayor's office into this conversation in terms of areas of need, again, inside of the school as well as outside of the school. But the WLC, we really view their work as very critical. I'm sure many around this table feel the way I feel about the way in which Dr. Burgos and her small team has been able to do some things that honestly in decades, we haven't had this type of momentum and sharing between districts. And I think that we believe that at this point, utilizing some of that momentum to tie it to Redding, to link these initiatives is a very beneficial stage right now for us to be able to look at where we are and how the work that Dr. Burgos and her team are, what the work that they're doing in our schools and how it relates to the overall redistricting within the city of Wilmington. We see the two as definitely being related. And if we can't address some of these core needs today, then we're doing ourselves and our children a disservice. When Councilman Street mentioned that if all we intend to do was to change the name on the building from this district to this district, this is an attempt to do that, to address some of the needs that are beyond changing the name, that is really about addressing some of the core concerns, again, inside and outside of our school. Many of the things that Dr. Burgos and her team have been initiating. And so that second step we feel is a way in which we can support them. The third is providing an overall timeline for the submission of our plan. And again, that will be the ongoing work of our body to continue to address the stipulations as we go forward. And those stipulations, that I'm not sure how we'll break them down, but they'll be broken down in stages and groups, and we'll work them into our future submissions for our interim plans. We believe that having this approach where we're all together as a body. Initially, when Redding was started, we had these massive charges, and we had decided that we would have working groups, the educators working group and the social determinists in the governance group. That was the way in which we decided to attack the work. But very initially, the initial stance for Redding was that it was going to be one body that dealt with this. Those secondary groups really came as a second step. So we're returning back to that initial thought and concept that this full body will be the group that vets and works with us to move from our interim plan from stage 1 to stage 2 as we continue to develop and present our future iterations of the plan to the state board. And as they provide us feedback, we'll continue to, again, adopt the plan and move forward. In the next year or two, in the next stage, it mentions some of the areas, the Newcastle County tax pool, in other areas, funding educators that we will be dealing with. Again, mentioned areas inside of the school as well as outside, working with community. nonprofits and trying to get additional supports in place, both inside of the school as well as working with, we believe city government will, in the role that they can play in supporting this. We are, and then again, questions are answered and input through our final plan as we continue to work. Initially, our final plan, we will submit it to the state board, receive their feedback. And hopefully they give us the green light and they approve it, and it will be presented to the General Assembly for action. If it passes, then it will be presented to the governor's office, and then that is when the implementation plan will come into to play. And then ultimately, again, getting to that point where physical buildings and students will actually shift for our, and again, that's that next 3 to 5 years. The draft timeline, as you can see before you, starting with where we are now, with our current proposal that we're beginning, that we're drafting, and most of us has seen it. Again, with where we're starting again is the Rivers Plan. Our 4-body meetings today, we're speaking about the shift due to the information provided from the Attorney General's office about our path forward and our approach to getting to our final plan and what's needed in the interim. So we're going to utilize our consortium meetings for our review. And the next stage will be for, once we begin to say that this is the interim plan that we want to present, we will vote as a full body that this is the interim plan that we want to submit to the state board, and share that plan with the state board. We will see their feedback. And our goal is to, during our monthly meetings, to continue to, again, hash out our plan, to move it forward, to progress toward the stipulations and develop the plan over the next year and a half, to have our final submission ready for the state board ultimately by December of next year. And October, to have it ready for, in October, to have it ready, and we'll host our public meetings then before it's voted on by the state board. Yeah, and then just speaking after, so the state board, if they approve or deny, if they deny it, then they will give us feedback, and we would alter the plan, make adjustments, and resubmit it. And if it is approved, again, it would go to the House and the Senate for a joint resolution, then hopefully pass and go to the governor's office. More than willing, yes, Mr.
Oh, my.
So I like the interim plan, but I'm still wrestling with why it's gonna take us 18 months to 2 years to develop this plan. We don't need the anthropology. We know what's wrong with the system. And if we're talking 2 years to get approval and 3 to 5 years to help fix it, we're gonna lose another generation of young people in the city to not being able to learn. We're just gonna fall further and further behind. And it's no fault of anybody's, I think, as a great boss of mine, he said, just tell me the time, don't build me a clock. And I think at times we're trying to build a clock. We need to tell the time and get it done. Time is money, if we put more money in and brought somebody in to really do this plan, what is it gonna be? The biggest hiccup's gonna be the financial part. Was the last time and the time before? That's really what people are gonna focus in on. How does my teacher roll with your teacher, my school, and all this other money stuff? But I just think we just really need to take a look at that. Listen, there's gonna be a new governor. There's gonna be new mayors. There's gonna be a lot of new people that are gonna look at this, and hopefully they're gonna say, yeah, I agree with it. Or you know what, I got my own idea, my own plan, and we're gonna go back to square one, and we're gonna do that. So I just say to the group, I think we really need to figure out how to make this work quicker than what we're proposing right now. That's it.
And of course, I believe that most of us, everyone around this table, I believe agrees with you, but I think some of them, and many things have changed since the last time this was presented. You think about the last time when we had made it to the General Assembly, some of the big sticking issues were the conditions of the buildings inside of Wilmington. And now you see that has been addressed. So now that issue is taken off the table, but many other things have been added onto the table. So if we think about our charter schools, some of that wasn't the way it is now in the city of Wilmington then. So we have the opportunity to really be deliberate in our actions in ensuring that we hear from our district partners. In all sincerity, I wish we can just say, here we all know we did this before, but we can't because it's two important things. I think most around the table realize that for years, for decades, we've mentioned Christina leaving the city. So we would think that, okay, that's a no-brainer. That's figured out. It's not. Believe it, it's not figured out. So we have to figure that out. We have to figure that out in terms of the receiving districts, in terms of what does it mean. I think some of that work is again, I allude to it's going to be some shared work and overlap between the work that we do and as a body and the work also of the WLC. I think a lot of it will work because it's about the immediate conditions. And as we are planning for a long range 3 to 5 year plan, again, Dr. Burgos and her team is trying to address some of those immediate concerns so that hopefully when we won't be losing this generation between the 3 to 5 years with the work that is happening inside of our schools through the WLC. That's our intent and how we believe that both of our bodies are working together toward this same goal.
Can I,
Representative,
can I add something real quick, Councilman? Or did you want to?
no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I agree with you, Kevin, in the sense I think that the newly proposed approach is very generous. Some think it's too generous, but I think it's good in the sense that I know you really heard some of the discomfort last week, and I think we want to make sure that we are making adequate space. I think one example was when we were looking at doing public hearings and realized, there's a process in the relationship with the district to set ourselves up to be able to hold those. So there's just some realities that do add time in. But that said, I think, all the members of this consortium, all of the partners implicated in terms of the districts offering information, we can go as fast as we want to go. We are able to complete the stipulation sooner and bring what we consider to be a final plan that the consortium approves to the state board in 6 months. Great. This doesn't say that we have to wait 18 months, but I think we're suggesting what should be the most time taken. And I think also, on the slide that kind of had the graphic of the timeline, it suggests a couple of things for what an interim plan would include, including, and perhaps others want to speak to this now, some of the short-term action to support the long-term action that a redistricting plan represents, be included in this interim plan and acted upon sooner. So I think that we are trying to think about that potential lost generation while we're working through paperwork.
Thank you.
Senator,
Yes, sir. Councilman, go ahead.
very briefly. I hear what everybody's saying, but the harsh reality is the January 9, 1978 school desegregation order was implemented in September. So I don't want to hear it can't be done. More importantly, for this discussion, which Councilman Kelly started, which I agree with, and we also agree with Representative Kachoka. We need to declare an emergency as it relates to the schools, city schools in Christina. You got more substitutes in Bancroft than you have regular teachers. It's chaos and nobody's learning anything. And so just to say, well, we're going to wait 3-4 years. No, something needs to be done right now. Something needs to be done during the summer. Something needs to be done with a brand new start in the school year. And as far as I'm concerned, the district's already moved away. It's not happenstance that they ran down there to Glasgow. So now, if city parents do have a problem, no, they know they can't get there, so the only thing they can do is the kids who have failed in elementary and middle school, when you send them down there to the high school, it's easy for them to put them out of Glasgow in that district office than it is in town. Give me a break. It's out of control. You've never seen anything like this. I quit.
No, you don't. We're not gonna let you. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. Looking at the timeline, so today is the 28th, and we are discussing the shift in approach. And I do see some of the things that have been outlined, and it says on the it says the 21st, I'm very sorry. And then it says on the 28th, we'll receive the interim plan for review. Who is drafting this interim plan? Like, where are the details? Because we got the plan last week. And then we're saying that next week we're gonna receive the interim plan. Who is working on actually creating and filling in the details? Because it says, you know, that we're gonna have interim plan that does these three things. Who is actually working to write the plan?
So our base plan is pretty much the draft that we all received, and I could say minus a lot of what was geared toward the stipulations, because a lot of the stipulations is what we're going to work on as a body. So the initial plan is us informing the state board of our initial plan is to go toward a 2-district model. And it mentions everything in our charge in terms of the stipulations and our charges from the legislation. That's what's going to be in our initial plan. These are the things that we're going to address in our initial plan. We're going to start here and it's going to go forward. So a lot of the base of the plan is what was submitted.
So what we were given last week is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
And you're leading that process. The team is doing all the drafting. And I
When we
think,
say team, who's on this?
oh, our staff, so our UD and DSU staff.
Okay.
And you guys can raise your hands if anyone doesn't know who you are. And, yeah, I mean, so I think last week the purpose was to get substantial input from members of the consortium to inform that, the development of that further, correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Can I follow up with that?
Yes,
I'm sorry.
absolutely. Sorry,
I
I
just
just
have
wanna make
concerns because, I know that this was a surprise to many of the educators who are working in the schools, and we know that ultimately the educators who are working in these buildings have the students' best interest at heart, but were not included in what could be something that they could foresee to be done to them. They have had no input. I've spoken to my local leaders and on the union side, and the educators feel that they've been left out of the conversation. They have not been engaged to talk about what this looks like. We want to ensure, and I say we, DSCA wants to ensure that no harm comes to our educators, financially and professionally. When we talk about stipulations, I forget which one it was, let me quickly go through. One was completely left blank, and I know that, you know, we're gonna be working to fill that, and we can send it in, like, superintendent said, and bits and pieces and phrases to the school board, phases, not phrases, excuse me, but we haven't talked to our educators about what it looks like for them to be making these moves. We want to make sure, and it's in here, that it's a smooth and minimally disruptive process, but we have not talked to our educators about what that looks like. And I know that there are stipulations, we've got lots of bullet points, but last week, all we did was kind of go back and take a look at what we thought were concerns and comments, but have those been addressed in the new plan that we're gonna submit? Because I know that that's what we spent time on, when we did our retreat, and we talked in small groups, and have those issues been talked about as well?
Some of that feedback will be included in that interim draft, some of those things that we realized, but and also in terms of like the educator's voice, we definitely realize that is a need, and as for the body you represent, for that to be a part. So when we reach those stipulations, that's where we need that input. We need that input from you, from your members, in order for us to help develop those stipulations. So it does achieve exactly what it is, being minimum disruptive, and it takes into account our children as well as the educators. But so that is the point. When we get to that stipulation, it's there. And we look at the timeline, again, our far out point is 3 years. So we're not at that point where we're saying like, this is happening tomorrow. So we're at the point now of saying we're planning right now for interim plan that will continue to be developed. So now is the time for input from your body, from the educators, from the representatives inside of the schools, the union reps.
And then another question about the interim plan. It says it's outlining a stronger role for the WLC. What does that stronger role look like as far as you're concerned?
We are trying to figure that out, again, working with the WLC, but our initial thoughts were that it would entail giving the WLC more authority, some changes to the MOU or some things, again, to address some of the immediate concerns. Like our plan is addressing a bigger issue of governance. We know there are many issues that are smaller issues or just as big issues, but they're under governance. They're a part of the bigger governance issue. The WLC, they were tasked with addressing some of those issues. They were tasked with helping to build this collaboration between districts. So we feel that some of these concerns that can support our redistricting efforts that overlap between us and the WLC, some of them are like loosely outlined in the MOU, but some aren't. And that's how it was mentioned that that's a possibility of having the WLC assume some of those issues to address some of those immediate concerns in the here and now inside of our schools.
So are we talking, giving them authority to make more financial decisions, to make more managerial decisions, to hire and fire decisions? I'm not clear on, maybe that hasn't been fleshed out. But
It hasn't, and again, we're trying to figure it out about our relationship with WLC, and we just see it as being when someone hears that we're starting this process, but it's about three to 5 years from now, that doesn't address our immediate concerns. We believe fully that the WLC's work is about immediate. It's about looking at where we are today, the state of our schools, and helping to provide redress and solutions to help move us forward. We think that the MOU, as it's stated, gives them some of that authority, but we believe that if they have more authority and the opportunity to have greater support, working collaborations with the districts outside of what's in the MOU net currently, then that could assist with addressing some of these immediate concerns.
what are some ways that you believe, I'm sorry, monopolizing, but I'm gonna continue to do it. What are some ways that you believe the WLC is being kind of bound? You said they don't have, you want to give them more authority to make decisions, to be able to collaborate with the districts. Where do you see the failing in the collaboration that this authority would help them to do their job better? Because the WLC has not really firmly put both feet in the ground. They just got started. You know, we don't have data to prove that what they're doing is moving us in the right direction. And I'm not saying that it's not, because they haven't had a chance to show that. But if you're asking to give them greater authority, where do you see what they've already been given is not going to be enough to meet the needs of what's happening and to solve those immediate problems? Like, what are you looking to give them that they don't already have now based on the MOUs?
I can't answer that. I don't know if Dr. Burgos would like to chime in if she feels obligated to or willing to.
I mean, I might be putting
It's
someone on the spot,
again, it's
you know.
yeah, it's a point to us, and again, it was mentioned to us. And while we see it as something that we want to align our efforts with, is because it's about the here and now. And the here and now is related to this overall, rather, and we can speak about buildings, we can speak about teachers, all of these issues that the here and now, they relate to governance. They relate to the overarching goal of what we're trying to accomplish. So, Dr. Burgos?
Sure. Good evening. I certainly don't want to speak prematurely, but I'll say just two brief comments. One, in the MOU, it states that the WLC will have authority to make some decisions, certain decisions. It doesn't spell out what those decisions are. So I still feel that that's a stake that needs to be put in the ground. And then secondly, just for some context, when the WLC was designed, many of the models that were referenced, including the Springfield Empowerment Zone, in Springfield, Massachusetts, as well as the Leadership Academy Network and Fort Worth, Texas. If you look at and compare the contracts, the agreements, the MOUs to what the current WLC MOU is, it's very different. It's a lot more explicit where the authority lies and to what degree and for what decision. So that's what I'm trying to move us closer so that there's greater clarity for everyone.
Matt was in line,
I'm happy to
but,
wait.
okay.
So as I'm hearing tonight, I've sort of, my mindset on where we're going has changed a couple different times. But my initial thing was around, actually, potentially it's just word choice. So when we talk about interim plan, in my head, when you hear interim, it's we're gonna do this much, and then then we're gonna do another this much, and then we're gonna do another this much. Interim is usually like there's something in between. We're gonna do this in between. We're gonna do this in between. So just hear me out. What I think I hear you say is what we're talking about is iterative drafts
Okay.
of a plan that then gets executed. But then that's where I thought we were earlier on, and then we sort of, I feel like almost backed off of that. So for example, one of the issues that we've been discussing as a collaboration between, differentiation maybe between the WLC and Redding is the high school option, right? One of the major issues for our Christina students is being bused down to Newark because there's no high school option. Like, if we were to solve that, would that be an interim or do we wait till the end? See where I'm going?
I'm sure we.
Go you first.
We solely, I mean, in terms of addressing that very point, in terms of one of the key aligned areas between WLC and Reading was that high school option. And we fully believe that that's something that we share with WLC, and that their work, especially the work hands-on with the district, is we would hope that would lead that effort in the interim that help set the stage for us when we get to the redistricting. Again, it's that what we feel the immediate helping us toward our long-range plan that we have for Reading.
Yes, and what I was gonna say, and it was helpful, but I think, the way I think of it is that we've always, as a body, been able to make recommendations for action at the General Assembly level in particular. And, I think we could see any of a number of recommendations that live in an interim plan, that, maybe are not within our power to act upon. So like one example would be executing on a high school, I guess, in theory, although I think we think that probably can't happen until redistricting has occurred, or other ideas that have come out in conversations, like recommending that the General Assembly take action on referendum reform, or expanding pre-K, or choice and charter policy. Like, these are things that we can put pretty specifically in an interim plan as ideas that we think we agree through a vote of the consortium are great ideas that someone could take and run with outside of the consortium as a recommendation from our interim plan. Does that make sense?
No.
So like we should be
I'm trying to
thinking big
define
like
it
that. Yeah.
for the group because I think it will bring clarity.
But I think especially as it pertains, is my understanding, to the redistricting and the actual line change piece, it is an iterative draft until it's a final plan that the governor has signed and all the other phases. But there's other things that I think we can recommend for action, whether it's a WLC role, whether it's expanded pre-K seats, all the other kinds of things we think are good ideas that should be acted on sooner. We should not hesitate to be talking about.
So to your point, right? So we talk about in the WLC, really the heart of it was our educational leadership teams and our community councils, like bringing from the bottom up,
Yeah.
right? Ideas from the bottom up. Some of those ideas may require funding, right? One of the things that I think is critically important is retention and recruitment of teachers. And I've mentioned it to a number of people in the room. Wilmington School, that was just the Christina plan, had additional money for teachers, had additional money to allow for extra planning time. And we created some working conditions that were supposed to help improve the educational process. But until we get the teachers in the building, it's hard to see that all come to fruition. To your point, the data's not all there yet, right? But as we move forward, I would hope that those would be the kinds of things that potentially wouldn't sit in a iterative draft,
Right.
but we moving forward as an interim plan.
We can, yeah, and because the consortium has to vote on these interim plans. We're endorsing these ideas and recommendations, and I think as legislators, we can always take action and others can take action. Matt, I think it's finally your turn. Yeah.
Thank you, Ray.
This
So-
scares me.
I said, I'll say the same thing I said before I talked last week. I defer to Representative Chakotcha and Councilman Street as far as what the best districting plan is. And if they think that if we're going to change district lines and those are the best district lines, I'm inclined to agree with them because they've spent the time looking at it and they're both much closer to on a day-to-day basis to the schools and the children than I am. I agree with what a couple of folks have said, that in terms of submitting a final plan, that we could do it much more quickly, and should do it more quickly than the timeline that was being discussed. Having said all that, I want to be sure that we don't jeopardize the success ultimately of what we're trying to do by trying to do things either without having given enough thought to how they're going to play out, or without having consulted with people who we ought to be consulting with as we go forward. And I also want to make sure that we're not being under ambitious in what we propose, because I agree with what I was listening in the car on the way up here, and I agree with what Councilman Street said earlier, that if we just move some students from one school district to another and say we're done, that is not really victory as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to suggest when we do, if it's next week or whenever it is, when we do propose some kind of whatever we're calling it, I'm going to specifically suggest that we add some things to it beyond just moving students, and people can vote for it or not vote for it, but I wouldn't want to see us vote on just the district lines, and because I think that when you get locked into that as the solitary focus, then the other things kind of fall by the wayside, because frankly, that's complicated enough. So in terms of how that would apply to what we do, like over the next week or so specifically, the Wilmington Learning Collaborative issue, I think, is a separate issue from the interim plan, because we were talking about doing something, as I understand it, that would happen close to immediately if we're talking about next school year. And the Wilmington Learning Collaborative exists by virtue of this memorandum of understanding, and there's no requirement that we go through the state school board or consult with the state school board as far as changing that goes. But as it stands right now, it's also an agreement that if we were gonna just go through the MOU process, we'd have to go back to every school board and get sign off on it. So if we were talking about doing something short-term or next school year, which I'm okay with doing, I think we need to be very focused on that in the short term. I think that Stephanie's questions are entirely appropriate. Like, what are we talking about here? And I don't think it's fair to expect Dr. Burgos on the spot or on the fly to answer those questions. I think she deserves time I think Stephanie deserves to have very precise answers to those questions. And I think Dr. Burgos deserves time to come up with those. And I think we all deserve time to see what's being proposed before we vote yay or nay on it. And if that can happen before, when's our meeting in a week?
April 11th.
But when we're going to be voting on, okay.
April 11th.
So,
is our
yeah,
next-
I just think there needs to be time built in there for us to see what exactly is being proposed as far as the learning collaborative, and what would change in terms of its governance. talk about that and then figure out like, how do we do that? Because it might involve passing a bill, and I don't know, but there's some mechanics to that. And if we're talking about doing something that's going to happen in time to be planned for and implemented for September of this calendar year, I think that's, you know.
Yeah.
And on the other, in terms of the interim plan that we submit, again, I'm gonna suggest that we add some things to it. And I guess what I wanted to say about that is we should think carefully about what exactly we are asking the school board to do with it. Because the state school board, yeah, because I think our deputy attorney general did a good job, you know, putting together a memo for us that, you know, she clearly knows what we want to do, and she's trying to help us figure out how to do that legally. And I wish every deputy attorney general, when I was attorney general, was working that constructively with the groups that they represent. But, you know, people, I mean, I think the fact that we have sat around this table and sort of been torturing ourselves about what the language of different words means is probably a sign that, you know, other people might not agree. Even though we've got advice from our deputy that, you know, that this is, you know, this is an appropriate way for us to go forward. And also, just because it's legal, doesn't mean it's necessarily a good idea. And so I think that we need to think about, when we send it to the school board, what exactly we're asking them to do, whether we are asking them to have some kind of dialogue with us in some sort of, I mean, I know the school boards sometimes meet jointly if we want to have some kind of joint meeting with them to talk about it, or if we really want to ask them to have a yay or nay vote on a tentative, non-binding approval, or you know, just sort of what the value in those things are. I think it's just worth us thinking about before we ship it down and sort of open it up to whatever kind of issues are going to arise about how we did it or not. So I realize I said about 10 different things and talked for a long time, but I really think that the WLC part of it is kind of, you know, pressing, and that we really need to have some concrete, you know, focus on that and answers and be able to deal with that.
And I was just gonna say, I think I agree with everything that you said, except for the part where you said you see it as separate, because I think when we talked about grappling with that very big idea, which is a very urgent idea, I think it's the kind of big idea we should be encouraging ourselves to incorporate into an interim plan. That is something that we are deliberating about as a body. So I see it as so crucial to and connected with the longer term redistricting plan that I think it makes sense for us to have some kind of a recommendation in our first interim offering to this overall big idea. That's my position on that. I don't see it as separate. I see it as linked, you know, to Nambi's point earlier. But I'm one vote equal to the votes of
So I think
everyone
there
else.
might
on
be
this
alignment in the focus of the work, obviously, because Redding is focused on children within the city of Wilmington. WLC is focused on the city of Wilmington, but I think to Matt's point, the process and how both entities are structured are different. So any change to an MOU will have to come back to our local boards, and in that process and engagement with schools, and that process definitely will have to be clearly defined, just in terms of what the roles, expectation, impact, the staffing. And then we're not only talking about one district, we're talking about 3 districts. We're also talking about, again, how the MOU is outlined currently with a lot of vagueness, and it is supposed to be built from the bottom up rather than now that this process reversing that and making it top down. And so I just think thinking through those things, and again, I think the work itself is aligned, but the processes and how both the consortium and the WLC are structured are.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clear that what I was suggesting also was that if it's not, if time doesn't allow to go back through the whole multiple school board process, the legislate, I mean, you all are legislators, and, you know, I mean, you have the ability to just pass a statute saying this is how it's going to work.
So you're saying maybe the role for the consortium is to recommend an alternative action?
I'm saying, first of all, we need to know what it is we're recommending, because that's important. But then beyond that, if it looks like time is not going to allow for you to go back through that MOU process, then, you can pass a bill that says that this is how it's gonna work. And I think, if we think that it's urgent to do something before September, I would suggest having some kind of date by which, if it's not happening one way, that,
Well, that might be a good segue back to your slide about the sort of the time choice we have. I'll say, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we have a meeting scheduled for April 11th, which the initial intent was that that be when we vote on something to send to the state board, who are expecting us on April 18th. That's a couple weeks away. I don't know if that's still your intent to have some version of an interim plan for us to consider at that date, or what, or if there's another alternative.
That is still the date that we would like to shoot for the state board for the interim. It would be the 18th, so.
Okay.
Yes.
I just thought that would be helpful to point out, and there are backup dates. There. So, any questions about that, concerns?
Can I just restate that
Mhm,
I'm not sure I heard clearly? So we are saying that April 18th would be the date that we are setting to share the interim plan, be it 1, 2, or 3 of these bullet points with the state school board. Is that what I heard you say?
Right,
Okay.
that, once we, as a body, has voted that this was what we want to send to them, that's when we want to have it.
If the consortium doesn't vote that it's ready to
Right,
send
then it
something,
won't
there's
go
nothing to
anywhere.
send.
Understood, but I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure that I heard
Yeah.
correctly. Thank you.
You're looking to do that on the 11th.
To basically gather some of the feedback toward that, to add some more structure to our initial plan, to hear our comments, areas of what our members feel should be added, present that to our full body, and then, yes, that's what we would like to present to the state board.
But that presentation you're just talking about, is that the meeting on the 11th?
Our meeting is on the 11th.
That's when the next iteration of this will be presented.
That's when we, yeah,
I
correct,
just was making
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
There was another meeting that was gonna show up.
yes,
We're talking about doing that on the 11th.
You
yes.
don't want to see us every week, Dan.
I think every week's fine, just a little notice is helpful for the calendar.
So I'm still a little confused, on interim, be a phase in of a plan, or this is a tourniquet that we're gonna apply to stop a major bleed as we bring in other people, other doctors, and say, okay, what's our plan of attack here to fix the injury? We've got a massive bleed, right? Councilman Street, we have a crisis in the city. We do have schools that understaffed, it is a crisis, right? And are we talking about WLC as a tourniquet, right? That something that we grab, apply, and help stop that bleed. While we figure out the pieces, like the 2-district plan piece. We still haven't talked about what's minimally disruptive. It could be that having 3 districts in the city is minimally disruptive. But that has yet to be discussed. So I don't want to bind the consortium with a vote that it's going to say it's a 2-district plan, that's it. Until we have that discussion with the right stakeholders. Because as Stephanie was talking, having the teachers come in, I still think there's room for superintendent discussion to help figure out what is minimally disruptive. What do we do in the interim? What is that tourniquet? I think that's kind of where my head is.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that interim, I think that was what we're trying to say about where we are right now. And that's why we kind of wanted to see in terms of what support Redding could lend to WLC in this immediate to address some of the concerns that you're mentioning. And then in terms of the interim plan, it as it's phased in development, I say that the phasing is development of the plan toward the final plan. So that's in each one of the stipulations, that as we would get more input and as we, with this section, this stipulation, we feel we've covered, everybody's in agreement, we're going to send that to the state board. And that's how we want to move forward with it. So getting that input from our educators, from our community, from the school boards, and in order to process and go forward, it won't be, this is where we are and that's it. I think one of the things we heard last, and you were one of the loudest voices saying, there's no there haven't been any transparencies. We're not meeting. So now, you know what? We want to meet. We want your input. We need your help. We can't do this. And I've said this to my brothers who run my schools, my superintendents, all of them. I say it out loudly, publicly all the time. I love you guys. And I think we need your involvement. We need your input. We can't do this without you, because it's your voice, your school boards. Ultimately, whether you have our children now or we want you to have our children later, these are all our shared children. So this is our process. This isn't Redding's process. This is our process. We are all a part of this decision-making body. We can't send anything to the state board without approval from all of us. We're approving each step of the plan.
So, again, I guess I'm looking at that suggest two district model. If that wasn't in there, I think I would be right on board. And even if it's, even the word evaluates or starts with the evaluation of it, because again, we haven't gotten the feedback of what is minimally disruptive. And I'm not talking about going through all the different pieces again. But I think already stating from the get-go, it's a two-district model for those discussions they had.
I appreciate that. And I think to Superintendent Shelton's point, particularly as pertains to the redistricting component, which is our mandate to execute on, that is iterative and it's not binding until it has run the full final plan process and received approval from the General Assembly and been signed by the governor. So I think, what we put out there is for us to discuss, for us to present to the state board for feedback and put in a position to be legitimately discussed with all of these broader stakeholder groups that we've talked about, which to me was very clear last week. It's really vital that we not delay on any further.
Just a quick question, clarification. So on the 28th, as a member, when I hear plan, something has to inform that plan in the next 7 days. Just conceptually, what should we expect to receive on the 28th? That may help a little as well.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking something has to inform the plan. And I imagine the plan is driven from the stipulations. Am I right about that, or is that even too far? So yeah, just trying to think what when I look at 28th and I get my email, what am I opening up?
I believe the way I view it is, it's basically this meeting. Yeah, we're going to open up with our councilmen and all of the historical challenges and how many times we've tried this process. That's going to be our beginning at the state, the historical, about how we've gotten to where we are. We're going to speak about our current, our latest, meaning we act the last time we tried this, and what were some of the chief concerns and primary concerns that led to effort not to be successful, and then how some of those areas have been addressed. And then our presentation, again, our plan forward would be, this is where we want to begin, right? Again, as we said last, we were trying to pick up where we have left off. So that's why we have the two district model. As Link is suggesting, maybe that can be debated and discussed more. We're welcoming that. But again, this is where we're starting, rather than saying we're starting, from blank. No, we're starting where we have left off, where we have documentation, where we have support from our school board, support from city council. That's where we wanted to start as debate. Thank you.
Time check. It is 8:44. Yeah, time flies when you're having fun. So that's, I love that consortium, right?
But they didn't have any checks today against a pool.
Can I
Yes,
don't want to keep people here later,
no, this is important.
but I'm inferring from some of what I've just heard, and like I said, I'm also gonna be suggesting some additions to the plan, that discussion is not going to be a short one when we have it. And just going back to what I was talking about earlier, the WLC issue also is potentially fairly involved, and it's going to require a fair amount of discussion. And there are multiple time exigencies built into that. One of them being that if the school boards aren't going to, approve whatever it is we recommend at our next meeting, then you all need time to figure out if you're going to do something legislatively and talk to your colleagues and get that done. So I'm trying to figure out if we are going to have time at our next meeting to deal with both of those things to their conclusion, because if we have to have an extra meeting, then I'm fine with that. But I guess maybe I don't speak for the group on that issue, but I mean, what I don't want to have happen is have us spend so much time talking about the districting issue that we lose the opportunity to talk about the WLC issue, which is, more time sensitive for a variety of reasons. And then suddenly it's July 1st and we're just kind of out of luck for the next school year. So, yeah, A, do we need to have an extra meeting? And B, do we have some kind of process and deadlines for ourselves by which, and maybe it's a week from today, everyone's going to know exactly what it means to have WLC take a larger role and be able to, I mean, is that something that we're going to have in a week? And I guess I'm probably looking at Dr. Burgos.
Yeah.
But
What?
I have to your point.
Yeah.
So we get the plan as consortium members on the 28th. What method of feedback do we have to offer once we see the plan with more details? Like, how do we get, because I have thousands of questions, right?
Yeah.
And so when we see the plan again, and whether or not those points have been addressed from last week, what points do we have moving forward? Because we absolutely have to make sure we get this right.
Yeah.
So when we get the plan in our inbox, and we read through it, what do we do next if we have questions or concerns? Because we won't get back together until the 11th. And on the 11th, to your point, Mr. Den, I'm sorry, how should I address you?
Matt's good.
Matt, I'm sorry, Matt. That it's already almost 9 o'clock, you know what I mean? So when we come here at 5:30 and we're talking and discussing, and how can we get some of those questions answered before we get into this room again?
Right.
I believe I think an approach with, if there are questions, once you receive the plan or even before you receive the plan, send them in and we can try it. If we don't have the answers in what we're working on, then we will schedule meetings with stakeholders, with yourself, and try to develop the answers so they can be addressed and included in our interim plan, because we can't move forward. Rather, it's a stipulation that we're addressing currently, or one we're saying this is in the next bunch. We know that we're going to have to address these concerns. So if you have them, what your questions are, send them in, even if it's, we haven't reached, stipulation 6 yet, but these are questions about that the sooner we get them, the sooner we can begin coming up with the answers and helping to ensure that they are addressed in our interim plan, that once it's for that stipulation and is submitted to the state board.
Do you have something in mind in terms of how you would like to engage in
I'm
feedback giving?
just trying to figure out, like, how do we all hear all of the questions that we have before we get back to this table again? To make sure that some of them that can be addressed have been addressed before we come back to the table, and some of them we might have to hash out as a group. Talk, to Superintendent Fuller's question about, is 2 better than 3, or is 3 gonna work? I mean, that's a question we need to talk about. Has the consortium agreed that 2 is what we're doing? It seems that we're not there. How do we answer these questions without, we might need additional meetings, because we have questions that are just not being answered. So I'm not quite sure. It's not a Google form, it's not an email chain, because.
Right, that's what I'm
Or
wondering, like,
need another
something in mind.
thread,
Zoom
but-
office hours
Right,
or
so I
something,
just wanna
right?
know,
Like,
what are we looking at?
Yeah.
And We may not be able to-
We are open, I guess if there is a need and request for additional meetings, especially topic specific and area specific meetings, and we can pull in the needed stakeholders to help us address that area, rather it's a stipulation or it's just a concern, like maybe from your members, then yes, but we can schedule additional meeting, and rather it's a full meeting or a meeting where individuals who are concerned about that stipulation or that area of concern will join us.
Maybe I'm missing all. To me, isn't this, we're gonna send this conceptual plan to State Board of Education. Here are the 12 things that we're gonna look at. Here's what we've got to flush out as we move forward. Otherwise, we're gonna, Stephanie, all the questions she had, we're gonna have to answer all these teachers' questions that are all these that we need to be able to do, and there's a lot more that needs to be answered at some point. I'm gonna get to that. So I agree, you can get your questions out as best you can. To me, we're setting down a conceptual, we want a river-to-river plan, it is this and that, here are the 13 issues, whatever we gotta look at, and here's how we're gonna try and best address it and go back.
So outside of educators, if the community members have questions, who did they send their questions to?
There's an email for that.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
That was
that's
posted.
great, because I mean, it's not just educators who have questions, I mean, there's a larger community, the potentially affected people and families and, you know, all of those things. If people have questions about what it is that's on this paper, how do they get those questions in time for us to change and alter the plan if necessary?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's an email for that, okay, okay.
And again, I think just as we, I think, close or get towards closing, remember that we collectively as a consortium are in the driver's seat with this in terms of how we wish to engage on feedback and planning, and when we feel comfortable advancing. I like that you use the word conceptual, but to me that feels accurate. Interim proposal to the state board. I think these are our decision points for the members of this body. So I don't want you to feel that we are, you know, I'm supporting what the councilman and the representative are putting forward, but ultimately the power is in this group to affirm that at every step.
And I just think, Senator, that point is critical. You know, I'm an advocate. I'm not an educator. And Namdi and I certainly don't have a monopoly on ideas. And it's our consortium. It's that doesn't belong to a handful of us. So, and the key players in this are in fact the educators. So I get that, at least from my end.
Thank you. Representative? Representative is good, so we are going to close out that, and I think, was that our last agenda item? Oh, public comment, of course. Sorry. So if we have anyone who wishes to offer public comment in the room.
Hey,
Or
Tizzy.
online. Oh, yes.
Sorry, can I just clarify? And Bill, I see your hand. I won't take long, but I just wanted to sort of clarify. Maybe I understood it a little bit differently than what we've been talking about, but I just wanted to clarify that I think the interim plan that we're talking about, I put it in the chat. Obviously, not everyone's on their computer, but I think sort of, if you think of it in sort of headings, I guess, it would be what Namdi discussed, sort of the history, the charge, why this is, you know, critical, why now, sort of the proposed boundary shifts, how we've, you know, the river plan, how we've described it, maps that would show, you know, the boundaries, the schools, zip codes, different shifts like that. The WLC involvement, if we can get that fleshed out. And then the timeline for a path forward. So the plan for how we're going to answer those 13 stipulations, not, you know, our best guess at trying to say DSEA would love to see this for educators. I don't think that's appropriate for this interim plan. I see that all of those details being fleshed out between, you know, now and June 2025, in sort of that goal to reach the final plan. So I feel like in my head, the interim plan is sort of just a first step. If that helps sort of people feel a little bit less anxious about the amount of details we would need to get into an interim plan. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, it is helpful, and, I think we have to own that we put the stipulations in front of everyone and probably caused some of that anxiety, and that's what we're trying to.
So
back
should it be
different.
called a plan? Because ultimately it's a briefing to the state board, right?
And-
My question would be, how many of the current state board members have the historical knowledge about everything that we've been discussing to this point, and they have to weigh in and provide a book?
And, well, that's part of the plan for what they will be hearing, I think. When, so let's say we don't have a interim proposal for them, an interim plan, interim proposal, I think they could still be given the historical context of that. Okay. Everything is helpful, and I really appreciate how engaged. I hope that is a sign of our seriousness to continue. I saw a hand in the room for Representative Williams, and I see a hand online for Bill Doolittle, and I don't know if those are our only two public commenters. Oh, and Mr. Taylor. So I'm going to start with Representative Williams, and then we will move online if there's no one else in the room. Oh, okay.
So thank you. I'm still a bit confused. I think if you would have just said you were moving on with the interim plan without deciding that it's going to be a 2-district without having input from this group and all the stakeholders, probably would have been something that would have moved forward rather quickly, because it seems like a lot of people are stuck on that. And I agree in empowering the WLC with more, but we know that Christina is, the ultimate goal is to, no offense, you agree, remove Christina out. Why don't we just do that? That's the plan. That's where we're gonna start. Remove Christina. And then we develop the plan of what that's gonna look like over the next year and a half. Like, that is the goal. Is Christina out? Everything stays the same. There's still, WLC will have input. You guys will have input, but they're removed. And the plan moves forward, but you've already decided it's a 2-district plan, and no one understands what that means. And I think that's the sticking point. So, and also remember Easter's in there too, so a lot of educators will be going away. So trying to get feedback is going to be really challenging for DSCA and also for the school boards, because they already have set schedules. We got to give public notice to set meetings. So like, I want this to work, and I believe it can, and I know everyone's heart's in the right place. But I think the 2-district plan is the issue. So that's all.
We have one more in the room. Mr. O'Mara, would you like to introduce yourself and offer your public comment, and then I believe we can move online.
O'Mara, I wanted to hear probably the most important conversations going on in the state tonight. One thing I would want to suggest is that we didn't talk a lot about kind of how the assessment of public school funding kind of crisis kind of fits into the ability to reposition this conversation when we weren't able to before, and all of a sudden talk about all the additional services they can provide and all the additional resources that are at the table. All of a sudden, it's not a zero sum anymore, right? There's actually more resources.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I cannot hear what you're saying.
Oh, I'm
Can you
sorry.
step forward, please? Thank
I
you.
was just saying that I mean, given the report that just came out a few months ago on the additional investment we're going to have to make in the schools, sets up a conversation here to be much more impactful, right? And all of a sudden, the fears that folks had 10, 15 years ago about losing their district, having money flow in different directions, we can add to the overall system. I would just be really, my recommendation, my one piece of advice is just how we frame this over the next 4 or 5 weeks is going to frame how it plays in the legislature, how it's going to play in the governor's race, how it's going to play in like the next general assembly. So anything that I can do, but I think more conversation with educators, the more we can get out publicly and get ahead of it, have that framing around more resources, right? And so people aren't afraid. I worry about the zero sum again, right? Where some parents are like, this is going to mean for my district, my kids. And like, I just think there's some kind of a proactive message, which hopefully arm in arm with teachers kind of going forward. Because if we do that, then all of a sudden we're not in defense. And I don't want hardened opposition before it comes to you guys ultimately. So anyway.
Thank you for that. And moving online, Bill, you've got first.
Sure.
And then Mr. Taylor, and then I see we have some more, and then KCNS Smith, and we will go from there. Bill.
Yeah. Bill Doolittle, Volunteer Advocate Children at Risk. As always, thank you for all your work. I see you guys as being the best chance for the children of the city of Wilmington. As you know, I always come at this issue from a complex system analysis improvement perspective. And I think we need to be realistic about that, particularly to not forget things as we're moving forward. I mean, if you look at everything we've been able to accomplish, and if we do the governance change in the city of Wilmington, you know, even with the extra funding that's flowed through for the children, if we close the gap by 10% with all of that, we did more than anybody else in the country has done with those types of changes. The elephant in the room, and the reality is funding adequacy is the big mover. And small incremental changes don't make that happen. I mean, complex systems theory says it's a n squared factor for percentage. So if you put 50% of adequacy into a system, you will get 25% results. So if you extrapolate, say 700 million is what we're sort of thinking about, we're underfunded now. Using past analysis, that says that Wilmington needs somewhere between 160 and $200 million a year. If we don't look at having at least half of that when all these changes occurs, we will be seen as failing even if our progress is minimal. So I just want to have everybody keep that in their mind.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Good evening, everyone. James Taylor. I just wanted to jump on real quick and lift up a point that Dr. Burgos made in the WLC meeting yesterday that I think is pertinent to everything that I've heard this evening. She laid out a list of like factors that were holding up kids' progress with respect to outcomes in the city. And one of them was the fact that we seem to be prioritizing adults and what their concerns are over these kids. With that said, you know, I heard a lot of that tonight. We have teachers' concerns holding things up. You know, we have other folks raising issues when clearly there's a timeline. Clearly there's a path forward according to the DAG that spoke. So, you know, I just want to say, let's get moving, because to Kevin's point, we can't afford to lose another generation of kids while we twiddle our thumbs and try to appease every stakeholder group. Move forward, go and present to the state board and let the chips fall where they may, because frankly, Kevin is absolutely right. In a year, there will be even more cooks in the kitchen trying to boil the broth, and they'll have different opinions as to what a good broth tastes like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Taylor. Dr. Keithia Nesmith.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Dr. Keithia Nesmith. I am a member of the Red Clay School Board and a parent in the Red Clay School District. And without sounding ignorant, but just kind of going into layman's terms, it is not clear, and I haven't been following the Redding Consortium over the decades, and I know there's a lot of actors and work that's been involved with all of these pieces, but it's not clear to me what the problem of practice is and why the solutions being recommended for redistricting will somehow change the status quo and current reality of what's happening in our city schools. I think a lot of times we focus on our schools and not the actual communities in which the schools are located. And so to the point of the other people that have spoken as well with funding, I think everybody's heart is in the right place. It's going to cost a lot of money. And for anyone who's run a school district or understand all the nuances of a school district, some of our well-intentioned endeavors can be actually harming. So I implore the Redding Consortium members to really dig deep and do your due diligence and research and understanding each of the aspects of any type of suggested change that you might want to make and not wait till later to figure those things out. I believe that what Dr. Burgos said earlier about the MOU not having specific stipulations in it, this is an issue I brought up since Governor Carney even mentioned it. And I don't know why we are rushing to get things done. If you don't do things well, it's gonna fall apart. And so with the efforts and the energy that have been put into this consortium for several years, and with the WLC and with our existing school districts, we have to do a better job of making sure we know what we're doing before we start to put proposals together and have things be put in place. Everybody's role here is different. As a legislator, your role is one thing, as a community member, it's another. And I understand the heart and soul that goes into all of this work. But I also know that if you don't have a systems approach, if you don't have all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed, it's a performative act. And it ends up falling on the backs of the people who are working the hardest. So I just hope that with all the brilliant minds in the room, there's some reflection around the path forward. The elephant in the room to me, again, not having been involved from day one, is take the school out of Christina School District. I'll get off. I don't see a time clock. I'm sorry. But take the schools out of Christina. So are we addressing the Christina issue? So thank you for your time and all your efforts. And if there's anything that I can do to support, I'm willing to help. Thank you.
Thank you. You kind of. Is there anyone else who would like to speak before we adjourn?
Can I just say one thing? I'm sorry, I understand where it seems like I'm trying to prioritize adults' comfort over what's happening in the lives of our students, but that's not what I'm trying to say. We know that our educators' working conditions, our students' learning conditions, and we are trying to make sure that that is done in the most methodical way so that nothing gets left off the table. I don't want you to think that I'm only looking at this through the educator's lens. I taught at Martin Luther King my first couple of years. I know what we're talking about. I know who we're talking about, but I also know that as the representative of the educators, we have to make sure that their voices are in the room because it lies, like Ms. Nesbitt said, on their backs, ultimately, to make this change happen. And if we don't ask them for input, it's not going to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for the good of the order? Then do I have to call for a motion? Motion to adjourn? Okay, whoa. Thank you, everyone. Talk soon.